So welcome to question 6. Question 6 always has a full specification with inputs, processors and outputs. Sometimes it's got some pre-written code already, particularly if there are things like arrays or other things that it needs you to use. Question 6 has also got 3 level-based mark schemes attached to it. The first one here is for solution design, and this is about decomposing the solution, about breaking it down, making the logic really clear, making sure you've got the right choice of variables. The more you can do that, and the clearer you make it, the higher the grade will be. Get marks for good programming practices, up to 3 marks again. That's about laying things out properly, putting all the global variables together, putting all the subprograms together as you need. It also includes things like using meaningful variable names, making sure that your subprogram names are correct, meaningful, and making sure that things like your parameters are meaningful. The more you can use commenting to explain the logic of your code blocks, and the clearer use you make of the code, particularly with using white space to help readability, the more chance you have of getting a high mark on this particular bit. The other 3 marks are for functionality, and this is where you have to show that the program is, if for 3 marks, fully functioning within the limits of the program. You need to make sure that your program outputs are accurate, that they're helpful, that they're usable to the actual person who needs to use the program. You want to make sure that it responds properly to the anticipated input. So, for example, if one part of the code one part of your input needs to be validated, you need to make sure that that has happened in order to make sure of that 3 marks in your functionality. So the main message for those 9 marks that are available is to organize your code logically, comment and use white space as you program, and if you do that, that way you can access those marks even if your program doesn't fully work in the end. You'll have shown some design, you'll have shown some functionality marks, you'll have shown some layout marks as well. So the first thing to do is to check the specification really carefully. The specification for question 6 will always have inputs, processing and outputs. With the inputs, these will be things like the input command, saving things into a variable. It won't tell you what the variable names are, you'll need to create those yourself. You'll also have to decide on the variable types. So for example, if it's going to be an integer, you'll have to get that stored in that particular format and converted if you're using the input command. You'll see that today. The other thing you might see in the input is validation, although that can sometimes happen in the processing as well. With the processing, it will be usually going through some sort of array or doing some sort of processing on a file. It will invariably loop around something. In this case, it's a linear search, so that gives us a good clue as to the sorts of things that we need to do. The outputs are going to be print commands, printing out the sort of final results, and probably some sort of error message if, in this case, the login name and the passcode isn't found. So, the next thing we need to do is to have a look at the file itself. So quite often in question 6, they'll give you some code that's pre-written, and it's a good idea to try and get your head around what you've got here. So if we look at it, what we've got is a list, and it's a 2-dimensional list. So it's got records of usernames and passwords and people's names as well. Now, you need to try and get your head around how 2-dimensional lists work, so you just need to remind ourselves of that a little bit. So, first thing to do is think about the rows. If you think about this in terms of rows and columns, that's row 0, row 1, row 2, row 3, and so onwards. So you can think of this record as being record 0, this one as being record 1, this one as being record 2, and on you go. Inside each record, you've also got different fields. again, you can think of these as columns. That's field 0, that's field 1, that's field 2, that's field 3, that's field 4. So what I'm going to do is just label these a little bit, just so that I know what I'm looking at in terms of the array. So what I've done is I've put some comments here just to help me work out what I'm seeing. I know it's a 2D list, and the thing about 2D lists is they go in this format of rows and then columns, starting from 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's record 0 in terms of the number of records we have. The fields, which are things like the number, the pin number, the name, these are going to be the columns. So those go second in the second bracket. So that gives me a really good clue as to what's going to happen later on. So what I've done here is I've set this up so that I can see where my columns are, and it just makes my life a lot easier later on when I'm trying to work out what I need to do for this particular piece of code. So we need to start working on our inputs. So the first thing to do is look at the specification, and it says prompt for and accept a login name, no validation required. So it needs some sort of login name. If I look at the login name that appears to have been given in the 2D list, that's a string. So I know that I need to start off by creating global variables to store some of this data. So let's just start with that. Global variables for inputs. So the first thing I need is login name. Keep it really simple. So login name. You want to initialize it. So we're going to initialize it to an empty string. It then says prompt for and accept a 4-digit password. You can assume only numbers will be entered. So it's a 4-digit password, passcode rather. Looking at it there, they look like integers, so this is going to be some sort of integer. So I'm just going to call that passcode. I'm going to set that to 0 at the moment. Ensure the passcode is between 1000 and 9999 inclusive. So it looks like there's a bit of validation going on as well. So let's see if we can deal with getting the login name without validation required. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it really obvious what bits of the program I'm doing. So inputs, login name, and passcode. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something like this. So login, and again, just be a bit careful about your typing. Input, that's my first one. And the next thing I want to do is I want to have the passcode. Now the passcode is validated. So what I'm going to do is validate passcode. So range check between 1000 and 999. Met these before, so what we know is that a validation is a range check requires us to use a while loop. So let's first of all see if we can get that passcode in. It's got to be an integer, so I need to convert it. Okay. Let's now get the validation going, and I'm going to be quite obvious with it. So loop for validation. So while the passcode is less than 1000, because it's got to be between 1000 and 999, or it's bigger than 9999, and notice I'm using these brackets which just make the code a little bit clearer to read. Colon pushes me in on the tab. I'm going to tell them that they need to sort themselves out and get the passcode right. So passcode must be between 1000 and 999. And the bit that often I don't remember, or other people don't remember, but certainly I forget, is you have to ask them again, otherwise you'll end up with an endless loop. So that's that. So there we go, there's our validation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just close that section off. So end of inputs. Okay. So let's just save that. I'm going to try and run it. Should be able to put any old rubbish in here, so handy. Let's try something that's way out of the range, so it's complaining. Let's try something that's just below the range, still complaining. Let's try something that's well above the range. And let's try something that's inside the range, so let's try 1000. And there you go, and that seems to have validated it. So that's my inputs and my validation done. And that's taken me a fair way with this question. And one thing to notice is that I've got structure. So I've put structure in. I've got commenting to explain how the code works. I've got white space. I could improve that slightly if I wanted to, by putting a bit of spaces there if I wanted to. I've got white space between my code so I can see what's going on, and I've done it in a logical order, and I've broken that problem down, started to show some decomposition skills. So the next section is going to be the processing section, and notice that I've created a comment there just to help me structure it again and give me an idea of where things are and how things are fitting together. It's going to use a linear search to find a matching record. It says it needs to work for any number of users in the list, so we can't set number of users to a sort of definite thing, so that can obviously change. We're going to loop until we find a match or until the end of the list is reached. So one thing you do need to learn is how to perform a linear search, and that's really what this next bit is about. So because we're performing a linear search, there are a number of variables that we're going to need to help us. So I'm going to put in some global variables up here, and I'm going to say these are the global variables to perform a linear search. And the things I need are going to be the index, so I need to know the position. So I'm going to put a comment in there, so the position in the list. The other thing we need to know is, has the item been found? I'll tidy up the tabbing in a minute. I'm going to assume it hasn't been found at the start, so found is false, that's a boolean. We're also going to need to know where it was found later on, because we need to print that out. So found position equals 0, so where the item was on the list. And we need one more thing. We need to know the size of the list. Well, here's a little trick we can play. We've got that list. We're going to go size list. If you need to use your PLC, but we're going to work out the length of the user list. And that allows us to have as long a list as we need. So store the size of the user list. And the last thing I'm going to do is just tidy this up a little bit. And then the final thing in here is I'm going to call that current item in the list, because that's not the search item, so I need to sort of make that a bit clearer. Give myself a bit of white space there, just so it's really clear. So that's me setting up the variables for this particular search. So what we're going to do is start programming our linear search. There's lots of ways to do a linear search, but I think this is one of the best ways, and it's certainly an easy way to handle it in terms of using a two-dimensional array. This will stop at 2 times, either when you find a match or it will stop when you reach the end of the list. So we need to sort of handle both a little bit. So let's see if we can work out a few things about this. So I've got my variables up here, and I'm going to use a while loop. And what I want to do is to keep going until a match is found. Well, I've got a variable called foundIsFalse that we created earlier, and there's a couple of ways I can express this. I could go found is equal to false, so that's one way of doing it. Or if you want a shortcut, and this is much more Python-y, if not found, which means exactly the same thing in a slightly different way. So we also need to stop when we have the final position set. So we also need to stop when we reach the end of the list. So and index is less than size list. So what's happening there? So index is going to start at 0, and we're going to add 1 to it each time. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The list is, we're going to have the size of the list worked out. Now I know, because I've looked at this question before, that that list is 19 items in size. So as long as index is less than 19, as long as index is at 18 or less, we can keep going. We're not at the end of the list. The moment we reach index being 19, that's the end of the list. We don't need to do any more. So that should be our loop. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put some comments in so that I can explain what will happen next. So we're going to check if the record matches the user inputs. And the other section we're going to need is down here. We're going to need to move to the next record. And to move to the next record, I'm going to go index equals index plus 1. Now, from the point of view of me teaching you this program, I'm just going to do a quick demo, and I'm just going to show you what we've got here. So I'm just going to put print index here, and I'm just going to run it. It's going to ask me for a login name, so I'll call it 1, 2, 3, 4. And notice it runs through until 19. So what's happened is it's gone round that loop. It's gone from 0 to 19, and then it's stopped, because index is now the same as the size of the list. And if you're not sure about that, then we can have a look at that as well. Let's just let's just run that. And I'm just going to show you what size list is. Hopefully it'll remember. There you go. Size list is 19 and index is 19. So index is no longer less than size list. It's going to stop. So that's our first condition sorted out. Let's try and sort out the second condition. I can get rid of that. And it's not a bad idea to use little print statements here, there and everywhere, just to test it a little bit. So to check if the record matches the user input. So what I definitely need here is some sort of if statement. And what I want to do is check if the login name matches the name in the user list. So I know I need to start with login name. But now what do I need to do? Well, it's got to be equal to. So just remember, it's not a single, it's a double equal to. A list is called a user list. Because it's a two-dimensional list, it has 2 open square, closed square brackets. So what goes in here? Well, the index is pushing us through each record. So it's dealing with the index is pushing us through the rows. So that's what we need to start with, because the rows go first. Where's the login name? So if we look at what we did before, the login name looks like it's in position 0, 1, 2, 3. So 0, 1, 2, 3. So it looks like that's in position 3. And it's very, very similar. Passcode is equal to user list. Again, I want to have 2 square brackets here. Again, I need to go through my rows, which are the index. Then I need to go through my columns, and I need to figure out which column that is. Well, if I look at it, it's column 4 here. Let me just check that. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's definitely column 4. Close the bracket and do a colon. Now, because it's a colon, it's pushed me in. So now I need to say what it's going to do. Well, there are a couple of things I need it to do. We need to set found to true as record matched. So we can say found becomes true. And that should help us exit the loop. The other thing I want to do is, and there are lots of ways of doing this, but I'm going to do it this way. I want to set my found position to the index position. Okay. Now the reason for that is because the next thing it will always do is add 1 to index. So you've just got to be a little bit careful here, because even if it finds it at 6, index is going to change to 7. So I can't just use index. I need to store it somewhere. So set, so store, I'll do that. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to work out where that position is, and I'm going to store it somewhere. So store position of found record, and so I'm going to store it here. Now the reason for doing that is just in case, well, not just in case, but the reason for doing so what we've got here is our linear search. We've managed to work out where the item is, so we've managed to detect whether we've got the item. We've set found true if we do find it. We've saved our position, so the reason for that is because this number keeps changing. So even if it was found in position 5, this thing would still change to a 6. So you've got to be a bit careful about making sure you store the right version. So that's the processing section done. So what I'm going to do is just double check something. There we go. So notice I've just debugged myself slightly. And what I'm now going to do is I'm just going to say that's the end of the processing section. So So next thing we need to handle is the outputs, and that will also give us a good idea about whether our processing is working. Finally, just tidy things up a little bit. There we go. Give that a save. The thing we have to handle on the specification is displaying a welcome message, include the user's first names and last names if the login and password are found, otherwise display an invalid input message if they aren't found. So we've got a couple of tools that we can use to do that. We know that if it's found, it will have set that variable found to true, and that's something you just need to learn with a linear search. You just need to learn that structure. So let's see if we can create an output section. So output either a welcome message or an invalid input message. So that's a simple choice, and it's a simple if statement. So if I've got a couple of options here. We know that a variable we need to use is found, so we know that we set that to true if it was found. Now I could just go if found. That's one way of doing it. That's a very Python-y way of doing it. I would perhaps be a little bit cautious about that, and I would go equals true, just so it's really obvious to you what's going on. Now we can print out our welcome message. So we're going to put the comment in there. So user is found. So output welcome message. Now this is fairly easy to build, but there's lots of different ways you could do this. We could break this down into different variables if we wanted to store different things, but I'm just going to put it into one line here. Welcome. I need my user list. Again, that's got two open close brackets and they're square brackets. The position I need is the found position, so it was found in position 5. And then I need it to print out the user's first and last names. Well, the first and last names are in positions 0, 1, 2. So it looks like the first name is in position 2 and the first name is in position 2 and the last name is in position 1. So I need the first name, which I think is position 2. And the other thing I need to do something very similar, but this time I need to find the last name, which is in position 1. So that's my print line created. So the last thing we need to do is we need to decide what happens if the user isn't found. So we need invalid input message as not found. Well, that's nice and easy. I don't even need to do an elif here. I can just do an else because I've only got 2 conditions. So it's either found or it's not found. If it's not found, I just need a really clear message. And one of the things they will be looking for is that these messages are nice and clear. So login name and passcode not recognized. I'm just going to tell it that that is the end of my output section. So let's see if we can test our program. We're going to first of all test it with somebody who's in there. So Valentina Schlee, who is this record here. So let's just try that out, and I need to type this in carefully because it's quite easy to miss. So SCA 108, and she is 6801. And it's identified her, it's printed out the right thing. And there's a couple of things I just want to point out to you. Found is set to true, which is why it's done that code there, why it's printed it off. The found position is 14 because that's where it found it. So it found it in position 14 and saved it. Notice the index went on by 1 because that's just to keep it going. But now because it is found and it's still not at the end of the list, it's going to stop. So that helps us a little bit so that we know that our code's working that way. Let's try another one, and let's try, for example, something with the wrong code or password. So let's try DRE07, and I'm going to make that 3154. So that should fail, and it does fail. And I want you to see that the found is stayed at false. It hasn't changed found position to anything. It's still staying at 0, but the index is 19, so it's gone through all of them to try and find it. So that looks like that's working fine. Let's just try it with another error, but this time I'm going to put in the name wrong. And I'm going to, so I've got the name completely wrong, but I'm going to go for 9042 as the pin code. That should still reject me, and it's still rejecting me. So it looks like that is working. So from start to end, looks like my validation is working, my inputs are working, my linear search is working, and it's outputting the data it should be. And if I just focus us on the code, notice that it's clearly laid out. I've been really clear as to what's going on inside the code, explaining it fully, putting it into different sections.